with something that Aldous Huxley wrote in his book, Doors of Perception. It's a little long, but it's good. I'm not so foolish as to equate what happens under the influence of mescaline or of any other drug, prepared or in the future preparable, with the realization of the end and ultimate purpose of human life, enlightenment, the beatific vision. All I am suggesting is that the mescaline experience is what Catholic theologians call a gratuitous grace, not necessary to salvation, but potentially helpful and to be accepted thankfully if made available, to be shaken out of the ruts of ordinary perception, to be shown for a few timeless hours the outer and the inner world, not as they appear to an animal obsessed with survival, or to a human being obsessed with words and notions, but as they are apprehended directly and unconditionally by mind at large. This is an experience of inestimable value to everyone and especially to the intellectual. For the intellectual is by definition a man for whom, in Goethe's phrase, the word is essentially fruitful. He is the man who feels that what we perceive by the eye is foreign to us, and as such, and is foreign to us as such, and need not impress us deeply. And yet, though himself an intellectual and one of the supreme masters of language, Goethe did not always agree with his own evaluation of the word. We talk, he wrote in midlife, far too much. We should talk less and draw more. I personally should like to renounce speech altogether and, like organic nature, communicate everything I have to say in sketches. That fig tree, this little snake, the cocoon on my windowsill, quietly awaiting its future, all these are momentous signatures. A person able to decipher their meaning properly would soon be able to dispense with the written or the spoken word altogether. The more I think of it, there is something futile, mediocre even. I am tempted to say foppish about speech. By contrast, how the gravity of nature and her silence startle you when you stand face to face with her, undistracted, before a barren ridge or in the desolation of the ancient hills. We can never dispense with language and the other symbol systems, for it is by means of them, and only by their means, that we have raised ourselves above the brutes to the level of human beings. But we can easily become the victims as well as the beneficiaries of these systems. We must learn how to handle words effectively. But at the same time, we must preserve, and if necessary, intensify our ability to look at the world directly, and not through that half-opaque medium of concepts, which distorts every given fact into the all-too-familiar likeness of some generic label or explanatory abstraction. So I read that as an introduction or a commentary on how our society has maybe lost its appreciation for this feminine type of wisdom, has lost our way of really being with ourselves and with nature and with experiences as they arise, and instead seems to favor thinking, the mind, intellectualism, academia, rationality, logic, science. And I think that's at a real detriment to us as individuals and as a culture. And I really believe strongly that it's important for us as individuals and as a culture to refine the feminine within ourselves and within the world. So how is it that entheogens facilitate this experience, this practice? This is the question. And I don't have a real answer here. I just have my own experiences, I have what I've read, and I have my theories around it. But I don't feel like an expert on this. I think maybe my guess is as good as yours. But it does seem to really put us in touch with this kind of, these kinds of truths, this kind of clarity, this kind of deeper experiential knowing. I'll give you something from neuroscience. They're finding, this is just in the past couple of years, well, there's older research of having identified something that they call the default network. It's a network of different parts of the brain that are active when we're not doing any task-specific activity. It seems to be related to self-referential types of thoughts. Planning for the future, thinking about the past, thinking about our relationships and ourselves, theory of mind, thinking about how other people think and might think of us. So this default network, they are finding is more active in people who are depressed and in people who ruminate. It's less active in long-term meditators. And they're finding that it's very much not active, or there's a lot less activity in those regions during psychedelic experiences. So there's something about psychedelics that seems to deactivate this activity. Yeah.
Which psychedelics? All of them?
So they've tested so far psilocybin, ayahuasca, and MDMA. Or those are the psilocybin, ayahuasca, and MDMA are the three that I've seen studies on.
Okay. Is there any reference to LSD?
Yes, they're certainly talking about that, and I imagine that they've done research on that as well, though I don't know for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It appears to be a consistent finding.
Okay. Even with the amides versus the amines working on the brains, the tryptamines have a different effect on the brain than lysergic acid.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing that happens. If that sort of brain activity is less active, what kind of activity is more active? The only other neurobiological information that I can give you is what happens in terms of what neurotransmitters are released on MDMA. And there's sort of excessive or increased amounts of serotonin release, of dopamine release, of oxytocin, of prolactin. These are neurotransmitters that tend to increase feelings of openness, warmth, acceptance, connection, insight, relaxation, empathy. So there's that's happening. What else? What about the psychological experience of this, of psychedelics? What do people notice or experience in the midst of them? I'm kind of curious if anyone has any thoughts on this. You know, what experiences have you had or have you heard of someone else having that maybe increased some level of intuition or deeper knowing, or knowing of the type that we've been talking about? Yeah.
Well, I realize with the task-oriented and self-referential behavior that it's a kind of reduction valve of consciousness that is essential to our survival, and I think that we can get stuck in that mode. So in my personal experiences, when on psychedelics or not, when you can access unconditional presence, the reduction valves get opened and you can just be with whatever is. And you're vulnerable. There's a feminine aspect to the reception and a different kind of tuning in that brings with it a lot of peace sometimes not, if something else is coming up. But there are moments when wisdom can access you because of this kind of surrendered type of consciousness.
Beautiful. I hope that others could hear that, because I'm not going to be able to repeat it verbatim, but yes, the idea that there's this sort of valve that helps us to filter through all of the information that we encounter in life and maybe get through life, do tasks, navigate the world in our everyday consciousness seems to somehow be broken open, maybe, giving us access to another way of knowing, to a deeper wisdom. Yeah.
For me, it would be more like.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I tend to flow. I mean, my experiences, it's been more like getting in touch with the flow. Like, there's a flow of energy that's always there, but I'm normally not in touch with it. And then in a psychedelic experience, I can become more one with the flow. It's hard to describe. It's like a blissful, euphoric energy that channels through me. And when that's happening, my only goal is to stay with it. But it feels like much less of a goal as, you know, getting up in the morning, getting this done, getting that done. It feels much less goal-oriented.
Okay.
And in those moments, my normal daily thoughts or worries or concerns are not really existent.
Great.
In a flow.
Yeah. So getting in touch with a flow, really tapping into that, and then letting go of everyday concerns and doing really whatever you can to stay with that flow. Yeah.
My experience is one of really like kind of a deeper trust, and the trust and the deep listening into actually the body's wisdom. So really seeing how the entire body is a source of information. So the information is delocalized. It's throughout the entire body. So instead of just getting information from here, getting information from the whole system.
Yeah.
So it feels a lot more expansive.
Absolutely. So there's a deeper trust and an ability to access the body's wisdom. Which is really important. And something I'd like to talk more about. Yeah, you and then you.
I think that there's like this opportunity to have contradiction, to have like the whole spectrum of sensation and experience, where I think like normally you're sort of determining is this like good or bad or right or wrong. It's like much more like, in black and white terms, and to be able to have the space where it all exists simultaneously. Yeah,
so a capacity to hold contradiction and paradox, allowing contradictory things to coexist. Yeah.
I've also found that it's the learning of the peak experience is a really powerful awareness that comes up during that moment. And it's something that I've kind of really started to peel back the layers of this identity of spirituality. And it's the intersectionality between physical awareness, mental awareness, and emotional awareness. And I think that's where the spiritual awareness kind of coincides. And we became more in tune with that during those peak experiences of wherever experience you're having. Anything from entheogens to meditation to jumping out of an airplane is that level of aha, that really kind of breaks into that.
Sure. So there's this moment during the peak of the experience where the physical, emotional, and spiritual seem to come together into a sort of aha moment. Yeah.
The best analogy that I've read about the psychedelic experience, and I hear about this from Neil Goldsmith, was that if our life is like a journey on top of the mountain that's high above the clouds, we're walking to find a point where we can see a break in the clouds. And sometimes, most of us, we keep on walking, and we walk and we forget why we are even what we're even walking to in the first place. The psychedelic experience with entheogens put a break in that cloud, not permanently, but just something that can give you a reminder, and a very important reminder that you can't really put into words. And that's why taking part in the experience is so important, because you can, to someone who hasn't had it, it's very hard to convince them that that's what you get out of it. It's kind of this reminder reminder of what is going on around you, it gives me a lot of trust.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so sort of a break in the clouds and a reminder of what's really there, maybe. Yeah, last one.
It's been a while for me. And I guess I come from a generation where psychedelics were used recreationally. And in that recreation, in the actual journey, there's a place where you come and you either face your death, your mortality, the internal process, or because it's a fine line there. Entering the stage of madness, because it is madness. And I think there was a whole big generation that got stuck in the madness and went into fantasy.
Yeah.
And so you ask psychologically what occurs. Well,
this is a perfect segue, actually, into what I'm going to move into.
But taken with a guide,
yeah,
which that generation kind of like strayed away from, and used it recreationally.
Yeah.
Taken as a guide and with the utmost respect of medicine.
Yeah.
We go through the madness.
Yeah.
And the integration of the experience, I would say, takes a lifetime.
Yeah.
So, psychologically, continue to integrate experiences which are, today it seems that there's more support to understand that we are just vibration, we're just moving, death is just leaving the physical body and vibrating into another. And there's more support for that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to stop my film and so.
Perfect. I'll take it from there, and that's a really great transition into the kind of last topic that I wanted to cover here, which is how do we cultivate this? How do we cultivate this type of knowing that that seems to be so predominant and yet not consistent in psychedelic experiences? And how do we go about navigating entheogenic experiences so that they bring us into that place of wisdom rather than the place of madness or, all of the other really difficult bad trip type experiences that we can have. And you mentioned a really important part of it that I wanted to speak to, which is respecting, honoring the substance as a really, really powerful tool that can both bring us into sublime, ecstatic, beautiful states and also into hell. So honoring the medicine. And I've been thinking about that in two ways. There's honoring the substance itself, and then there's honoring the healing part within us, the inner healing capacity within us that we always have and that we can access through entheogens, but also through other practices. So in our daily lives, just taking the entheogens out of the picture for a moment, there's a few practices that I think are really important to cultivate this way of being. One of them is a contemplative practice that might be meditation, or it might be something else. There's many other options, yoga, qigong, or whatever yours is. Go walking in nature, but taking some time to introspect, to be with yourself, to notice what's there. Taking care of the body. That, as Emily mentioned earlier, is maybe a portal into the unconscious, into this way of knowing. It's where we hold everything. And it has a lot of wisdom. You all know about the different self-care methods, so I won't even go into those. Other activities, somatic and expressive arts types activities that give us a little bit more freedom from our minds, maybe authentic movement or body work or focusing exercises. And a basic attitude throughout all of this that involves letting go of the thoughts and coming back to the feelings. Coming back to what's here right now. So in medicine work then, how do we create a situation that's most conducive to these sorts of experiences? Preparing the body and mind, as we spoke about, through contemplative practice, through eating well, through stretching, being in the body. And attending to set and setting. And here's where I'll mention my dissertation research. It shed some light on what the experience of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is, but that ended up not being the particularly interesting juice of it, because we already know what MDMA is like, and there's a fair amount of accounts of what MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is like at this point. What came out and was emphasized was the importance of set and setting, which we also already know, but I think that the way it's written about in the literature anyways, MDMA is seen as a substance that will enhance trust, and that's going to strengthen the therapeutic alliance. And what I found is that that's not always the case. And I interviewed 5 participants. I did a qualitative study and looked at what their experience was like and how they thought it had impacted them afterwards. And what I found is that there were several who had not, well, 2, I guess, really, who had not put a lot of energy into preparing for the experience. And attending to the therapeutic alliance, to the relationship between guide and participant, therapist and client. And that ended up being a real problem. So this takes us back to honoring the medicine, the substances. The medicine, it brings up whatever is already there. It really highlights the emotions, the relational dynamics, the unconscious issues. It brings them to the forefront. And so if there's anything going on in that relationship, it's going to come out, and that can get really messy. So with one participant, she had only sat or met with her therapist guide once before going into the experience, and she was highly anxious for most of the experience. She did actually find it beneficial afterwards, but still it was a difficult experience for her. Another participant had worked with her therapist for a full year, but there was a lot that had not been addressed. There was a lot of transferential issues coming up. She was, I need to put it glibly, she was projecting her mommy issues onto her therapist, and that wasn't being talked about. And that all came up in the session, and what ended up happening is that it came up, she didn't feel like she could talk to her therapist about it, and so she had to kind of stuff it back down, as she said. And after the session, she felt quite depressed, more depressed than she'd felt before, for almost a year afterwards. So these experiences are powerful, and they can have a major effect that may or may not be positive. Yes, Tara?
What's interesting is I wonder why that's a problem, that the one person felt anxious, that's something to work with, and the other one had these issues. It sounds more like it has to do with the relationship between the guide and the participant. That if that was that's great if you're anxious, but there's some that there's a space to work with that, or the issues come up, right? And we're not always looking for an ecstatic experience.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But it's not always what you get. So.
Yeah, that's really important. That it's not a problem that these emotions are coming up. It's more that there needs to be an atmosphere where they can be spoken about. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at here. After giving you these examples, the message that I wanted to convey is that these things need to be talked about. They need to be addressed. beforehand. Really, really important. Yeah, and in the midst of the experience, there are ways to work with them too. MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, for anyone that doesn't know, one moment, is doing this work right now, doing trials to treat post-traumatic stress disorder with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they're using a technique called focused bodywork, where the participant will check in with their body, notice any particular part that's feeling either a physical or emotional experience of any sort, but in particular anything that's challenging, and they'll ask them to go into it, and maybe they'll ask if they want some hands, some light touch, and they'll work with it in that way, and that seems to help people connect to what's there, and seems to help bring up all sorts of things. Often very difficult emotional experiences, but often repressed emotions and memories and trauma that they're then able to work through. Yeah, and I guess in general, this attitude of staying with the feelings and trusting what arises throughout the experience is important, and I think can really get us in touch with whatever is there and whatever needs to arise. And lastly, on that note, a kind of a trust that whatever is there and whatever arises is important and is going to bring us towards greater healing, growth, whatever it is that we're looking for. Yeah, so I'll stop there and ask for questions in the last couple minutes.
I'm just, I have two questions. I'm a little bit unfamiliar with MDMA. I'm wondering, it's like associated with the sassafras grass or something like that, or is it a naturally occurring compound, or is it? So
MDMA is not, it's a synthetic compound.
Okay.
Ecstasy would be the street name for it, and it is derived from either sassafras root or another, sort of the compound within sassafras root can be synthetically derived as well, and then it's made into MDMA. So you can't extract it from the sassafras root
so it has to be
on its own.
Combined and created?
Exactly.
Okay, and for those of us unfamiliar with the research, this research is fascinating. What was the goal of the research, using MDMA as assisted therapy for people with depression or post-traumatic stress disorder?
They're looking at post-traumatic stress disorder, and they're about to start a study for people with autism as well.
Okay, and what was your research, and what were the findings of it?
So I did not do experimental research. I did a qualitative study interviewing people who had undergone MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in the past.
Wow.
Just wanting to sort of do a pilot study to get a sense of what that experience is like and how they perceive the impact.
Absolutely. Was there a common thing that was discovered from the interviews with other people?
So there were a couple of themes. One of them was that if the experience was well prepared for, if the therapeutic alliance was attended to, and if the person was really supported in setting out some intentions and checking in with themselves to make sure that it was right for them. It ended up being a very powerful experience, led to a lot of insight, transformation in their lives, processing of trauma, greater understanding of things that were going on for them.
Oh, what kind of doses?
The typical dose would be 125 milligrams. I couldn't get that information because I wasn't in contact with the therapists,
Okay.
and they didn't know. But sort of a typical dose, really.
Wow.
Yeah, so really powerful experience with long-lasting benefits for those who had really prepared for it, attended to the Therapeutic Alliance, and integrated it as well. That's important, and I didn't mention it, but ERIE can tell you all about integration. And then there were a couple of participants who felt anxious going into it, or where there were issues in the Therapeutic Alliance, and they had really difficult experiences, and ended up, like I said, this one woman felt depressed for a while afterwards. So yeah, it can go both ways. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that if they're doing things where you're talking to the traumas in the body or whatever, it would seem logical to work with somebody that's got Rosen or some deep
Mhm.
body therapy.
Mhm.
That's, they've already got most of it worked out. You don't have to start from zero.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have a lot of trust of Western medicine, and I know in the beginning, Max is very Western. So they're carrying.
They're trying to work with the system.
Pardon?
They're trying to work within the system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know the excuse.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I
Yeah, I don't know that it's the best way. There's certainly, you know,
Yeah,
people going about it other ways too,
It's
but
a very patriarchal system.
yeah. Yeah, I guess the goal would be to make it available to people in a more widespread way legally, and they're working towards that, and I think it's really
I'm not
possible.
against them doing it.
Yeah.
I just think that they're talking more than they're listening.
Yeah, yeah, interesting point. Yeah, and in terms of the Rosen method, I don't know if you all know much about it. I happen to feel that it's a very useful method and could be particularly useful for this type of work. It's a light touch combined with sort of speaking with whatever's present in the body and giving voice to it. I don't know if I'm probably butchering that too.
That's fine.
But
That's basically what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
They were ignoring the whole science of this. 3 or 4 of very slow, you know, bringing, because the traumas get stuck in the body.
yeah, that's right, right.
But MAPS didn't invent that.
Yeah, no, they didn't at all. No, they've got their particular method, but there's a lot more research behind it, and research and practice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
The question with the MDMA specifically, since it, my understanding, it can also deplete the serotonin after the fact, which I think can also lead to kind of going the other way and dealing with some levels of depression,
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a couple of days or, you know, obviously in this situation no longer. So I'm just interested in how that plays in therapy when there's a tool that in that time could be very beneficial, but the after effects of that. And I'm just curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's an important point. The last question? Oh yeah, sure, I'll repeat the question too. Just the question around the findings or the sort of general understanding that MDMA depletes our serotonin levels. So, you know, there's a rush of serotonin during the experience itself, and then afterwards our serotonin levels are depleted for maybe a couple of days afterwards. First of all, they found that there are certain supplements, 5-HTP in particular, that can help to counteract that. So they'll have people take it before and afterwards. And it is a natural part of the experience, and so what they often, I think always actually recommend, is that you take the day afterwards to rest and recover and integrate. And what I actually found in my interviewees, or my participants anyways, is that a few of them had really beautiful experiences the next day. They didn't feel depleted and felt very sort of in that flow, in that place of knowing, and very open to the world in a way that they aren't usually. So I don't know that it's consistent, especially when you're really working with what's there. And my hypothesis around this, and this is just an idea, is that MDMA and maybe these other substances too, they bring to the forefront these repressed emotions and memories, and they give us the opportunity to work with them. And if we work with them, if we go into them and move through them, then we can actually come out the other side lighter and more open and with less holding us down. And I think that can be experienced in the day afterwards. If we don't, and I think this is what a lot of recreational users find, you know, you take the drug, you have fun, stuff comes up that or doesn't even come up, or if it does, you push it down and ignore it, and then it's there a little closer to the surface than it was before. So my thoughts around that, not confirmed by research as far as I know.
One last question.
Yeah.
Do you think that in some cases people using it recreationally in a rave setting can receive health benefits, spiritual, emotional, or otherwise?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mean to say that recreational use is always a bad idea. I don't have a lot of take on that, but my friend Tara over there did some research on entheogens and using movement to integrate those experiences. And so in rave settings, there's, you know, a fair amount of movement and dance that's happening, and I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be lying down, feeling the feeling and talking through it, there may be other ways to work with it as well, and I could see dance being one of them, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks, everyone.